So, good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to another Portugalist webinar. We haven't had one on property for quite a while, so I am very, very excited to have Scott Kirk with me today from Buy Property. Scott is waving over there. He is all the way from Canada now to the Algarve, I believe, and he is the property expert in many, many ways. And he also, I believe, is a descendant of Shakespeare, according to my research.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
if you have any property questions or any literature questions, he is the person to speak to.
Yeah.
Buy Property is a very, very interesting website. I think I'm going to get Scott to speak about it in a little bit, but it's created out of a need for the Portuguese property market. That if you're coming from other countries, where things are, let's say there's a lot more information out there for buyers. That hasn't always been the case historically in Portugal, and Scott saw the opportunity there and the need for it and set up Buy Property. And he has helped a lot of different Portugalist readers sort of navigate the property market and answer their questions and get an understanding for how things work over here. So, Scott, you are a man of many talents within visas and property and everything else, but perhaps you could talk and sort of describe Buy Property and why you created it.
Sure. Well, initially I come from a technology background, so I understand large data sets, and I've always been a property investor and understanding, looking for the advantage, looking for the way I can make smarter buying decisions. So one time, a friend of mine came along, and he was buying a property for his father. And his father came to him and said, we want to buy this property. So his son went and did all this research about which is the best property to buy. And he came back and said, this is the property. I think it's in that area. This is the best priced property. And his father came back and said, yeah, that's the best priced one, but this is the best deal because if you look at the size of the property and the price per square meter, this one is much larger and therefore it's a better investment in the long term. And that got me thinking, okay, well, if that's possible, that's an interesting concept. It's not necessarily about the cheapest price property, but what the property consists of. And I thought, how can we expand upon that? What other data insights can we bring to the table to help people make, intelligent decisions when it comes to buying property? And we did that. So I started looking into things like, how much can a property be rented out for long term? What kind of an investment opportunity is this? How much can properties be rented out for short term? And not only how much per day can be rented out for, but also what is the occupancy rate for each property? And we're able to get all this data live from Airbnb and all sorts of different platforms online and be able to put it all together in a really interesting platform that allows people to be able to see every single property throughout Portugal, how much it compares to other properties in that area, not only when it comes to the property price, but also the price per square meter, how much it can be rented out for long term and short term. And really what we've come up with is this really unique platform in Europe that is the closest we can come to other platforms in other countries like Zillow, for example, that provides all this really interesting information to help people make better decisions. And we utilize the data that we have access to be able to show people what the best property for them might be when it comes to the analytics.
Okay, that is really, really interesting. That isn't something that I've really seen before in Portugal and in a few other European countries as well. Mostly what we have here is most people will see is like a classifieds website. You see pictures, you see information. Often you don't see the location of where the property is. You have a little way of understanding, how does this property price compare to the other properties in the area? What was it bought for by the current owners, things like that. So are these sort of insights that you can also provide, Scott?
Yeah, yes and no. So the interesting thing about Portugal is they have a lot more privacy issues than, for example, the States do. So any property that's bought and sold here, they choose not to release that information to anyone. They consider that a privacy violation. So what we do is and rightfully so. I mean, it is a violation to find out how much your neighbor's house is worth and how much they earned from the sale, etc. I get it. I don't always like it, but I get it. So what we do is we work with the data that we have access to, and we collect a lot of the data over time. So one thing, for example, we can do is when a property comes on the market for sale, we can then say, okay, this is how much the property's been on the market for initially. Here's how long it's been on the market for, and these are how many price drops there have been since that market or property came on the market. And that gives really valuable information, because when you actually get to the point where you want to buy a property and you want to negotiate on the price, you can see that this property's been on the market for 2 weeks or like 2 years. And clearly the one with 2 years has more motivated sellers, and they'll be able to, maybe accept a better offer. They're a little bit more motivated than others. So we provide all this additional information as best we can, to be able to benefit the buyers.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm going to just put a little poll in here. This is something new that I'm trying out. So I'm curious for all the people that are joining. I can see that we have people from all over the world, but particularly from the United States, from Canada, from different parts of Portugal. I'm curious where people are at their stage in buying property, whether they're thinking about buying straight away or in a couple of years, and also where as well, because we sort of know that places like the Algarve and Lisbon are popular, but it's interesting to see what other places people are having a look at. So if anybody wants to fill that in, please let me know. And you know what? I think I'm curious to actually work out where people are looking at. So maybe after this, when I send out an email with the webinar recording, I'll also let people know where are the most popular places that people are looking to buy and move to. Scott, a few people have asked for your website. Just if you would be able to share that at some point in the chat, that would be great too.
Sure, I'll do that right now. So it's not very hard to remember. It's
Okay.
buyproperty.com. I'll do it right here. 1 second. There you go.
Well, that is definitely very easy to remember.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the first one I'll send over. Anybody who has any questions along the way, feel free to reach out via that link, and you can talk to me directly just by sending the message through the website.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you for that, Scott. We've got actually quite a few questions for you today, so we're really going to pick your brain about
Great.
property. But just for something personal, what made you move to Portugal?
Wow, that's a good question. I wasn't expecting that one. And it's a little bit of a convoluted story, but I'm a digital nomad by chance. I told you initially that I was involved in technology. So that gives me the benefit of being able to live and work anywhere in the world, really. I came from Brazil, which was a very dangerous place, the part I lived in. And we also lived in Mauritius and, England, of course, United States, Bahamas, really all over the world. So when it came to the point in time where we had our little girl, we decided that Brazil may be a little bit too dangerous for us. And we wanted to live somewhere that's sunny, warm, safe, has good schools for my daughter, good health care if we need be. And Portugal seemed to tick all those boxes. So we decided, again, we could live anywhere in the world, and we decided personally that Portugal was the best option for us. And that's why we're here.
Okay, fantastic. And in terms of sort of buying property in Portugal, which you're very familiar with, and I assume other locations that you've lived in too, what do you think are just the main differences in how it works here compared to other locations?
Well, I mean, the one thing about Portugal that really, I guess, confuses foreigners looking to buy here is how many illegal properties there are. By illegal, I mean they either have an extra room, they have an extra pool that shouldn't be there, maybe they have added on to the place and they have expanded their living room, or maybe the whole place is illegal. You never know. So for most of us, when we come here, we're used to coming from countries where there are certain very strict regulations as to what the bill should be, and everyone follows that, and that's the end of the story. Here, it's not that way. So it's a really big difference. I mean, it's not so important for apartments because those are almost always to code, but villas and houses, you really have to be careful, what's on the plans and what the actual final thing you're buying is, because it could get you in trouble later on.
Okay, and if I'm a first time buyer in Portugal and I've just heard that and I'm thinking I need someone to sort of explain to me which are the properties that are fully legal and which ones are not. Is that something that you're able to sort of help people with?
Yes, so that's part of, we have a buyer's agent service. And what that
Okay.
means is anybody who's looking to buy a property here, we're sort of a boots on the ground organization where we can help them not only find the property via the property portal, once they find the right properties, then we can walk them through the entire process of buying that property. And a big part of that process is doing the due diligence on that property. You know, is there any taxes owed on it? Bringing in surveyors to make sure there's no mold, making sure that everything is up to date. There's no issues, including that the property itself is legal to be on that plot. One thing we've seen, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, is this one house that people are very close to buying. It has some rebar, the bar sticking out the top,
Okay.
and the way they were selling that was we worked on this property the last couple of years. It's almost ready to go. It's almost ready to get the habitational license to be able to live in. So to buy it now, and it's a really easy step to get to the next step. And of course, what we found out is they were working on that property for 15, 20 years. And there's a regulation in Portugal that says, as long as the property isn't completed, they don't have to pay all the taxes on that. So
Okay.
they've been holding that for 20 years and not paying taxes. And of course, the property requirements to legalize that property has changed since then. So if someone does try to buy that property and they try to go through the habitation license, they have to redo a lot of the work that was done. So of course, they didn't buy that property and it went on to something else. But that's the type of thing. It's really
Yeah.
risky. I mean, you may get lucky and find a property that's completely legal and no issue at all. But there's so many things to worry about that people really have to be careful. And that's one of the reasons that people come to us as a buyer's agent, because our lawyers help them understand what's legal, what's not, is this a safe purchase, etc.
Yeah, I have had emails from people asking me questions like that. They're in the process of buying somewhere. They've found a swimming pool. It's not legal, and they say like, well, the person said it's just, it'll just go down to the council and register it, and it'll all be
It just
easy.
go down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then you sort of ask them, well, why didn't they go and do that before they could probably have sold the place for more money? And then you start to reveal that like maybe there's a reason those things haven't been fully legalized.
exactly. And now I mean, sometimes people have to get to the point where they realize it's illegal and recognize that it's not, it is common here, right? So the way I usually tell people is like, it depends on your level of trust, or if you can sleep at night knowing that the pool's illegal and, maybe the council won't come along and ask you to fill it in, that is, it's always a risk, but that risk is worth something. So when it comes down
Yeah.
to negotiating the price, you can say, listen, that pool's not legal. Therefore we need to have this much off the asking price. And it works as a negotiation point at the end of the day, if you feel comfortable moving forward at all.
I guess if you were thinking about buying a place and you were thinking, I'm just going to live, this is my forever home. I'm not
Yeah,
going to sell it. I'm not, maybe I'll pass it down to my kids and they can decide what to do. But then you could say, actually, a legal pool, I can take the risk on that one because it's not going
exactly.
to become a problem, hopefully later on.
Exactly.
So one thing I'm interested to ask you about, Scott, is this is something that we don't get a lot of information about when we're looking for property as searchers ourselves, is an overview of the Portuguese property market right now. Um, I I know you're sort of based more in the Algarve, but I assume you have a sort of bird's eye view over most of the country.
That's right. So our data, and I go by a lot of data, because we collect the data from all across Portugal. And what I've noticed as of late is that the property prices always seem to keep going up slowly. Everyone says, I'm just going to wait for it to crash, but it doesn't crash. In fact, in all honesty, I thought a year and a half ago it was going to crash because the prices were just going up and up so much. And in other parts of Europe, they have crashed. They haven't gone down significantly in price. In the Algarve, certainly in the popular areas like the Algarve, Lisbon, and Porto, they haven't gone down at all. And you have to ask yourself, why hasn't they gone down? And my opinion is because supply is not as high as demand. So there's always more people coming here because they recognize that Portugal is a really wonderful place to be. It really is a nice place to live, and people understand that. Despite all the removing the golden visa option, it's no longer possible. Despite the NHR option going away, or at least changing, um, people are still coming here because they recognize it's about the quality of life. And that's what the Algarve in Portugal in general offers. And I think that's why the property prices haven't gone down as much as even I predicted. What has happened is that the number of buyers have gone down significantly. You know, in 2023, I was just reading an article the other day that there's 20% fewer buyers now. Now, the reason for that is multiple reasons. For example, you know, the interest or the mortgage rates have gone up significantly. You know, there's a cost of living crisis, so people are now, you know, no longer looking for a holiday home as much as they were before, anyways, et cetera, et cetera. So what that does, while the property prices haven't gone up as fast as they have in previous years, they haven't gone down, but what it means to the buyers is that, you know, depending on how long the property's been on the market for, they're probably more motivated sellers. So if they've been on the market for longer than usual, you might be able to offer a much lower, you know, amount than they're asking, and
Okay.
they'll be happy with that because it's just it's slower these days.
Yes, and I assume like mortgage rates are play a factor in this too, right?
Yeah, they have gone up significantly, and I mean before it's 1%, and now it's up to 4 or 5% sometimes. So you know, obviously that has an impact. My theory on that is whenever the interest rates come back down, that's when the property market will go back up and
Okay.
expanding. So there's kind of a window of opportunity now, if you will, where the property prices are still the same. They're kind of somewhat stagnant. But with the interest rates so high, there's not as many buyers, so you can get in now, and as soon as the interest rates get up, your property value will increase as the mortgage rates go down.
Okay. That is interesting. So we've got to wait for mortgage rates to come down for things to pick up. But you're saying that in the meantime, there's an opportunity because the market is a little stagnant.
Yeah, and if you think about it, so what's happening right now is there's a lot of people in Portugal. I think it's 80 to 85% are variable rate houses or variable rate mortgages. And what that means is over the next couple of years, when they have to renew their mortgage, it's going to go from 1% to 5%, which means there's going to be a lot more properties potentially coming on the market. Now, what the banks are trying to do now is saying, okay, if you have say a 30-year mortgage and you paid off 10 years, and the mortgage rate goes up, they can increase the rate, the length of your mortgage to 30, 40 years, which isn't so good for the seller or for the owner. But in some cases, people just aren't going to be able to afford it whatsoever. So those properties are going to come back on the market as well. But right now, because everyone is scared about the interest rates, if they locked in at 1% and it's now 4 or 5%, if they sell their house and buy another property, they're going to have to go in with a new mortgage rate, which they can't afford. So nobody's selling, which
Okay.
again decreases the supply and makes it so that the properties are not increasing in value or decreasing in value. So it's an interesting time that we're at. Nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future. What I do know is back in the 2008, 2009 crash and how it impacted Portugal, and the prices kept on going like this until 2008, 2009. They dipped down slightly and then kept on going back up. And that dip is where I think we're kind of at now, where people can have this opportunity to buy and it'll keep on going up. That realistically, it's not going to crash down like everyone's hoping, and some people are really hoping for that.
Okay.
But I don't see that happening because the demand is so high.
Yeah, it is like from a visa's point of view, it is one of the most the easier country to move to in the EU. And there's so many people for various reasons trying to move out of other countries, often you know, wealthier countries like the US or the UK. And so that money is still going to be coming in as long as those visas continue to exist, even though things like, you know, like you said, the golden visa going, NHR going, it puts a bit of a dampener on things, but then when you compare it to all the other European countries, you still think actually Portugal's still a very good deal. And with the quality of life that you mentioned as well, cost of living might have increased. It's still, you know, more affordable than some of the countries that I just mentioned.
That's right. I mean, if you look at waterfront property here in the Algarve or water view property in the Algarve, and you compare that to some of the places in the States, there's just no comparison on price. It's still much more valuable here. And then if you consider it as an investment and the amount of tourism that we get here, it really cements the idea it's still a good investment.
Okay. Um, Now let's think. some people have asked about sort of the buying process. So maybe it'd be good if you could give a brief overview from, let's say, let's say someone goes to buyproperty.com, which I will put in the chat again because I know a few people have asked, and they do a little bit of a search and they find a property on there. What's the next? They maybe message the agent. What's the next step after that?
So what happens is when they message the agent, it depends if they want to work with us or not. If they
Okay.
want access to our free services, the free buyer's agent services, they just tap a little button on the inquiry and it says, come through us, and then we'll contact the agent on their behalf. And the benefits of going through us is the fact that not only do we have the experience, we're an independent company that represents the buyer as a buyer's agent rather than the seller, so we can help them understand the area if the property is problematic in whatever reason. We also have the lawyers behind us to be able to help them through the process of the transaction and making sure that the property passes all the due diligence aspects.
Mhm.
Once they do that, and just imagine if in this case they'll come through us, what happens is we then arrange for viewings for that client, and it can be, if they're abroad, it can be virtual viewing. So essentially what happens is we arrange with the agent to go through there with our webcam and be able to show them every aspect of the property. And then if they like that, we can then either arrange for them to come out here and view in person, or we can get their surveyors in to see how well suited the property is for purchasing, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes, especially during COVID, not as much anymore, people will buy the property sight unseen. Nowadays, people have a tendency to do the viewing of the properties from abroad, and then once they find the property they like, they make the special trip over to view in person to get an understanding themselves. I think that's the best way to go as well. Once they find the property that they like, and once they come over and viewed it, we then start working with lawyers to be able to do what's called a CPCV, which is like a
Okay.
promissory note. And the promissory note basically says we agree to buy this property, put the 10% down, 10 to 30% down, as long as it matches these criteria. There's no taxes owed. There's no issues with the property, for example, mold or illegal aspects of it, et cetera, et cetera. And then once we get that part done, then it goes on to deed. And then the deed, of course, is
Okay.
where they pay the remainder of the funds. Sometimes there's an extra step in there where you can pay a certain amount of money, and it varies per agency, to take the property off the market. Because say, for example, a property's come on the market for 2 days, they may have 6 inquiries about it that day. You want that property for yourselves. Sometimes agents ask you for like $1,000. They're just going to take it off the property to show that you're serious, and then you can go through the CPCV and deed after that and stop at any time. But you lose that initial money that you put in if you're not willing to go forward. But for some people, that's okay.
Yeah.
And so go back to step by step. Initially, you view the property, you potentially get the surveyors involved to look at the property, make sure there's no issues that are not necessarily seen by the layman people. After the surveyor comes back with the results, if you're willing to move forward with any kind of aspects of illegality and any other things they find, then you move on to CPCV. And a CPCV is a promissory note that allows you to put into the deal. They have to fix these aspects of the property before you pay the final amount, potentially saying how long you have to pay the final amount. Some people, for example, they need to sell their home in England or United States first before they buy that. Usually it's a 3-month term, but I've seen they go up to 6 months in time frame. And then after that CPCV criteria has been sorted out, then they move on to deed, where the property is put into their name.
Okay. So
That's Sorry, one more thing. That,
yeah.
of course, also assumes that there is no mortgage on the property. Once you add a mortgage into the mix, the bank needs to get involved and send their own surveyors out to the property rather than yours. In some ways, that's a good thing because you don't have to pay for the surveyor, the bank does. And
Hmm.
then that sometimes takes a little bit of time to get the bank to send a surveyor out there. And then once the surveyor approves it, and the bank approves the loan, and you can move forward with the deed.
Okay. And very quickly, just mortgages, because you brought that up. Then, if I'm looking to get a mortgage in for a property in Portugal, how does this work? And is there a difference depending on whether I already live in Portugal or I'm buying from abroad?
Good question. So there is a difference, whether or not you're a resident or a non-resident, and there's of course other aspects, whether or not it's your first property that you're going to live in or a rental property, etc. But for this conversation, we'll just stick to residents and non-residents. Typically, banks, when you're a resident, they'll give you a loan up to 90% of the value. So you put up a 10% deposit, and non-residents, they go 25 to 30%. So everything else essentially remains the same. There are some life insurance requirements for people living in Portugal that aren't necessarily required outside of Portugal, but the percentage is really the main difference. You have to pay typically 30% deposit if you're non-resident.
Okay. So slightly easier if you're already living there, I guess.
It's not that much easier. I mean, as long as you have your NIF number, your bank account, which again we can
Okay.
help people with, then it's the process is essentially the same. We just have a lawyer working the power of attorney on their behalf to sign any documents that come up. But the biggest difference is the percentage of the deposit required for the mortgage.
Okay. Interesting. Now, there is a question there that someone has asked about escrow and how you would pay the seller. How does that work, Scott?
It depends on every deal is different.
Okay.
You can go through the lawyers and deposit the money into the lawyer's bank account, and they'll hold it for you until the transaction is done. And that's actually surprisingly uncommon. Typically, what happens is you have the CPCB give the 10% that goes directly into the seller's bank account. And then after that, once it gets down to the deed, you pay the full amount into their bank account, but that's after all the documents have been filed. So if there's any problems, of course, you can sue them. But the deed itself, once you fill out the deed, typically what happens is at that moment, the final payment is sent over. So you already have the property in your name. So it's not usually an issue.
Okay. And with the CPCV, it sounds like this is really an opportunity for the buyer to work out what are all the things that I want to be sorted out before I really hand over the money here. And working with someone like yourself or a lawyer or something like that, they hopefully can see all those things and make sure they're written down so that you are very, very protected as a buyer.
Exactly. That CPCB is the time to get all those points in there so that those criteria need to be sorted out before a deed is signed. And so it could be things like, you're buying a condo, then all the condo fees have to be sorted out. Or if it's a property, then, the outside pool needs to be cleaned or removed, or the tiles need to be replaced, or for example, sometimes sellers think that they should take all the appliances with them, and other people say that you should leave the air conditioners there, right? So something that is every detail needs to be put in the CPCB, so it's very clear what you're buying and what you're not buying. Sometimes the property is sold with the furniture, other times it's not. Sometimes if it's a new build, that's even different than if it's an existing property. So it's critically important that you get it right.
Okay, I have heard stories on both sides where someone didn't realize all the furniture would be getting left and they then had to get a skip and get rid of a lot of it. And other ones where the whole place was just stripped and they'd taken everything down to the light bulbs. So I guess it is something that you want to get down in writing, because if it's not, then I guess the seller can do whatever they want.
Exactly, and they do. That's the thing about Portugal. If it's not written down, they'll take advantage of it as best they can. Not every time, but it happens more than you think. And I've seen it happen often. And so the CPCB is really more like a guarantee and an understanding. My father used to say, good contracts make good partners, and same thing they go with property sales. The more detailed you can get, the less surprises there'll be later on.
Okay, I think that's very wise advice. And let's see what other questions we have. So we've talked a little bit about the buying process. What about sort of additional costs related to taxes and things like that? If I'm buying, say, a property for 100,000, we'll just make the numbers easy. What sort of additional costs should I be expecting?
So this is a good question, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to send people to a website I made. 1 second.
Oh, nice.
Okay. So as you mentioned, so we do properties. We have the buy property portal, but we also have created another tool that helps people buy property, and they don't have to buy a property through buy property in order to utilize the service. And if you look at that link I just sent there, that shows the average taxes that will have to be paid on a property. And so you just asked about 100,000, and so that would be a stamp duty of 0.8% with 800 euros. And because it goes under the threshold of 101,917, there's no IMT tax on that.
Okay.
So there obviously is exceptions, and people can play around with the property location and property type and all that, and they'll change all the figures accordingly. But at 100,000 mark, there shouldn't be any taxes other than stamp duty. Now, there is different instances and different property or different tax values when it comes to whether or not you're going to live in that property or if you're going to rent it out. If it's in one of the autonomous regions, such as Madeira and Azores, or if it's on the mainland Portugal, and you can see all that within that link I sent.
Okay, fantastic. I think, yes, that sounds like it's the easiest way to answer that question.
Yeah. Now, just so you know, you asked about extra costs, and this is going for a second to all the extra costs outside of taxes, which of course can be, surveyors are a big one. Especially if you're buying a condo or a villa or a house, getting a surveyor to go through and check everything out ahead of time is really, really important. For example, we had this one property about 6 months ago. They had a borehole on the property. Are you still there? Yeah, okay. I thought you locked up there for a second. It had a borehole on the property, and people got excited about that because it was difficult to get water delivered to that area. It's quite remote, but the borehole itself was dry. So if anybody had bought that property, they would have had issues with the borehole because they'd not be able to get water out there. So that was resolved, and they were able to find a different property. But there's all sorts of different things that surveyors can find, particularly with mold. Insulation is a big deal. One thing people don't understand here is that the insulation in houses is almost non-existent. I remember I went to my mother's place in Winnipeg, Canada, where it's minus 35, and it was warmer in her house than it is in my house here because the insulation was better. And here sometimes if you don't get the right energy rating in the proper insulation, etc., it gets so cold inside the houses you'd be surprised. So people really have to understand, the energy ratings and the materials used in the construction, and the surveyors can mention all that ahead of time. After that, it's lawyers. Of course, you really want to have a lawyer to go through and do the due diligence on the property to make sure that everything there's no surprises later. And so there's a fee for that. Different companies charge different amounts. We try to charge an affordable rate for the service, as you can see on the propertylaw.pt website I sent earlier. And what that does is we connect our buyers with independent lawyers who can then handle the transaction on their behalf. There's sometimes other things as well, but those are the main costs.
Yeah, I will say on the sort of the coldness in the houses, that is, it's a real art form to picking the right house. And that I remember one of the first times I rented somewhere in the Algarve, I thought it's the Algarve. It's going to be nice, and I could go outside and I'd be, taking off layers. As soon as I went into the house, I was putting on gloves and jackets and things, and I couldn't understand it. It took me a while to sort of understand how these things work, but I think that's where someone like yourself comes in. You can sort of look at a property and understand different things that are going to affect whether this is going to be like a really, really cold place or is going to have issues with, damp and mold and other problems like that.
Yeah, and there are some big issues with that because a lot of times especially with the older houses, they really built the properties quickly and with consideration, for example, in the Algarve, the consideration to rent it out to tourists during the summer with no concept at all or no consideration at all for the winter months. And if you're going to be living here, it's an issue, and more of an issue than most people realize. So it's really important to get the surveyor involved in that.
Okay. Well, that is very helpful information, and I'm sure lots of people will be getting in touch to ask questions about that.
So
Let's see what other question.
I'm seeing here that for some reason Scott's links don't show up in the chat. I'm not sure
Yeah,
why.
I think I'm not sure if you've got to everyone. There's a little blue box
Oh, I
above your
see.
message,
Okay,
but
okay. Yep. One
I've
second here.
shared yours a couple of
Yeah, I can
times.
only share with the host or hosts and panelists. So it looks like I'm not able to select everybody.
You know what? I'm gonna share it for you, Scott, because that's probably an issue with how I set up the webinar. So sorry about that.
No
Um,
problem.
I did see a question there from let's see, from one person who had said, was it really less than 1% tax for property under 100K?
Yes, it
I
really
think
is.
that
I mean,
those numbers come
IMT
as a
tax.
surprise.
Yeah, I mean, look at, so if you go to propertylaw.pt And in the top menu, you'll see IMT calculator. You can see in there, and this is, something that's really useful to everybody to understand the extra costs involved with buying a property. If it's below 101,000, whatever, there's no tax on, no IMT tax. There is still a stamp duty, but that's minimal.
Okay.
Nothing to really worry about.
So let's see. We have covered the buying process and we've covered costs, and I know there is more questions coming in, so I will try and answer them. One of the things that's happened over the last year or so, Scott, is that there's been changes to the AL license, the sort of short-term rental license. If someone was thinking about buying a property with a view to renting it out, now, what would your advice be?
Another good question. You got some great questions, James. So this is it's a difficult topic because of the fact that things are changing so quickly. For those that don't know, the AL license is the license you need to be approved by the government to rent out your property for short term. In other words, if you want to buy a property as a holiday rental, use it for yourself a few weeks, and then rent it out on Airbnb to earn a little bit of generate a little bit of revenue after that, that license has been stopped for any kind of condo or apartments. And so in other words, it's a blanket law right across Portugal. Previously, in certain pockets of Lisbon, they made it so they thought they had enough AL licenses, so they stopped approving new ones. But now this previous government has said no more. Now, thankfully, it's still possible for villas. So right now, if you want to buy a villa house, then it's still possible to get an AL license for that. And quite honestly, it's a better investment anyways, because the yields are higher for houses than they are for apartments. People want to live in a self-contained unit in a house rather than sharing with everybody else. But there is laws that are changing. There's a new government in place, and the new government has said that it comes up to every freguesia, every municipality and council to be able to determine whether or not properties are allowed to get the AL license in those areas. Now, that hasn't happened yet, but it's hopefully soon they'll come up with a list of different areas that allow you to rent to get an AL license and which ones don't. Because, for example, in Lisbon, I get it. There's so many AL licenses there. There's not enough housing for the locals, even the people that work in the restaurants, etc. There's not enough housing for them, so they've limited that. But in places like the Algarve, where tourism is really the only option to generate revenue, the people are saying that these areas need to have the AL licenses. So that's coming down the pipeline. One aspect of that is you can buy a property that is considered a touristic license. So in other words, some properties have some hotels or whatever, a touristic license, in which case what that means is you can still purchase the property, rent it on an AL as an AL license, as long as it's agreeable to the hotel that's you're buying from or the organization you're buying it from, but you won't be able to live there. So I think they have a restriction on the number of weeks that you're able to live there yourself. So it's either right now, buy a house, a villa that allows you to get the AL license, buy an apartment, you can rent it out short or medium term or long term. What medium term means is like for all those digital nomads are coming here for 6 months, anything above, they say 3 months, but I think it's more like about 1 month is considered medium term. And then long term, of course, is the other option. But the downside about the long term is the fact that you no longer can use it for yourself for 2 weeks. It's rented out for the year at a time. The short term rentals have typically a higher yield, higher return on your investment. Medium term has in between the short term and long term returns, and there's a lot of people need those now. So there's quite a bit of a demand. And long terms are the price of the rental rates for long term units. Anybody is looking to come here and rent an apartment for their visa understands that it's really expensive. So on the other side, it means there's quite high returns on your investment as well. So yeah, choose wisely is what I would say. And
Okay.
I'm not sure when they're going to be changing these laws. Hopefully soon. When it does, I'm hoping it'll be everywhere. So
Yeah.
people can ask me for more details if they want to get to that point.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does seem like some of the things that changed last year might be getting reversed, or there's at least rumors in the Portuguese
Yeah.
news relating to property and other things. So it's probably a question that if I asked you this question in 2 months' time, there might be a slightly different answer because things are just moving so fast. So people should get in touch with you for a more concrete answer when it comes down to making that decision.
Exactly. And there's so many different aspects to the L license. It's not only to do with the frequency of the area, but also it's to do with the condominium management team if they want to have it in there. It's you really have to do your due diligence ahead of time because what happened is some people bought apartments and then the management has decided that the owners of the owners association has decided that they don't want AL licenses in there at all, and it stopped that. So now these people are stuck with apartments that they can no longer rent out short term. So it's something that people have to be really aware of.
Okay. Now, a lot of people hearing all of this will be thinking, I want to work with someone like you, Scott. Portugal sounds, or the Portuguese property market sounds a little bit like the Wild Wild West. Is there a downside to doing this? Like, is this going to significantly increase the cost of the house that I'm thinking of buying?
I mean, working with a buyer's agent, for example.
Yes,
No.
exactly.
Okay. So no, the answer is in our case, no. The different buyers agents work in different ways. For example, sometimes people say for 5,000 euros, we'll look after you, help you through the process of buying the house, provide legal services, surveys, etc. What we do is we actually provide the service for free, along with a
Okay.
property finder service. So if somebody comes along and says, we want to buy a three-bedroom villa in Albufeira, whatever, Cascais, etc., we'll put one of our team trying to find the properties that are on the market and off the market, trying to find the best property. And then after that, we provide a lot of free services. We can do, the virtual viewings and handle all the different aspects of purchasing that property. And it's all included in the price because what we do is we share the commission with the seller's agent. So typically it's 4 to 5% commission for the seller. And what they do is they split the commission with us, and that pays for these extra services that we provide to the people. So it works out quite well for everybody because the seller is not paying anything extra than they wouldn't already pay to the seller's agent. The buyer is not paying anything extra because we're getting the commission from the seller's agent. So it works out quite well for everybody. They get a lot of free services they wouldn't otherwise get and pay nothing extra for it.
Okay, fantastic. So it sounds like it makes sense. And I assume, though, if someone sees a property, it's best to go through your website straight away, right? Rather than to sort of find somewhere, go through another site, get in touch with the person, and maybe confuse this whole process that you've already got set up.
Yeah, well, it actually stops us from being able to help them at all. Because what happens is if an individual goes to the seller's agent directly, they then consider that person their client and they don't want to share commission with us. And if they don't share commission with us, then the people have to pay extra for the surveys, et cetera, legal services that we'd otherwise provide.
Okay, so go through you first if you want these services
Right.
for free.
Yeah.
And one thing, let's see if we've got some more questions from people, Scott, but it is very interesting learning about the buyer's agency service. And I understand this isn't a term that is traditionally used in Portugal. It's a common term in the US and not so much in Portugal. Can you explain a little bit what the difference is between that?
No, I don't think I can actually.
Okay, that's all right.
I don't understand the term in the US. What I can say is that, I think it's a broad term, is a seller's agent represents the seller. So it's in their best interest to represent the seller, get the best price they can for the seller. As a buyer's agent, we represent the buyers. So it's our best interest to represent the buyers, get them the best negotiating price, make it so that they are protected throughout the whole process. So in return, we add value to the whole transaction. And on top of that, people come back and recommend others to come to us.
Okay. And do people do you require exclusivity for people to use your service?
No, I mean, again, it's beneficial to have exclusivity because if somebody contacts all the other agents out there and they want to come through us afterwards to buy a property, if they've already contacted an agent previously, we can't negotiate a commission split with them, and we can still help them. It'll just cost significantly more money.
So let's say I was thinking about buying a property. Would this be the best approach? I get in touch with you, your guys start looking for properties. In the meantime, I could maybe look for properties myself and say, hey, Scott, these are ones that I like, but I don't contact them. And you can tell me whether those are ones you'd also be able to assist with.
Exactly. I mean, we can help
Okay.
with transactions that are on our site and otherwise. We do have more properties on buyproperty.com than any other portal out there, where the biggest when it comes to the volume. But sometimes smaller agencies have just listings on their website. And if they find one on there, if they contact us directly before they contact that agency, then we can offer all these different services.
Okay. And I'm aware that some properties are not always listed on any website, or it's we don't have. I believe the term is like an MLS system. Is that correct, Scott?
It
In
is.
Portugal, maybe you could explain sort of what this is and how the sort of benefit of a buyer's agent is that they can find these sort of hidden properties, so to speak.
So there, I mean, MLS system there's not such a thing in Portugal. As other people may be aware, in other countries, they have the MLS system, multi-listing service, which allows an agent to be able to go online and find out all the other properties all the other agents have, and they share commission. It's really a beautiful thing. In Portugal, like I said, a little bit like the Wild Wild West, it's not that way. And so what we have to do is if somebody comes to us as a buyer and say, what are the properties that you have available? We then say, okay, here's the ones we know about. And then we contact all our partnerships. And we have about 682 agencies we partner with throughout Portugal and say, what are the properties that you have that are not on the market? In other words, there's some people out there that are interested in selling a property, particularly the ones that are pricier. And they're just worried about other people knowing how much money they have or that it's for sale at all, etc. So they have off-market properties, or some people call them whisper properties or pocket
Okay.
properties, etc. And so what we do is we help them find those whisper properties and explain to them what's available in their area. So, and we only have access to that information due to our partnerships that we've created with these other agencies. So in that sense, it's beneficial as well. But there's another aspect to it. Whereas we have, I think it's 2.4 million visitors on our Facebook pages. We have these groups, and inside those groups, we can put out a message saying, anybody have a property that matches this criteria? And it's quite often that people do. Maybe they have an individual is thinking about selling their property. They mentioned it in there, an agency that hasn't quite listed it yet. And so we find a lot of properties that may not have been found otherwise.
Okay, that is really, really interesting. One thing that's, I'm just going to ask you one quick question about buy property. Some people have been asking if you work on places like Madeira and the Azores, Scott.
Yeah, I love it there. In
Okay.
fact, I think Madeira and Azores is an incredible investment if anybody is
Okay, interesting.
interested. Yeah, in fact, I'm even thinking about moving there myself. I mean, I come from an island in Canada, Vancouver Island, if anyone's curious. And so I have that island blood in me. But there in Madeira and Azores is amazing in the fact that they have this, well, first of all, NHR, non-habitual residency, the tax mega scheme here in Portugal that was stopped a while back, or at least modified, changed a while back to not company or not encompass everybody, is still available in Madeira and Azores in its original form. So that's a major thing. Second of all, corporate taxes, if anyone is self-employed or wants to create a business here, they have a startup tax regime that says it's only a maximum of 5% for any corporate taxes, which is again amazing. On top of that, I mean, the island's just beautiful, right? It's
Yeah.
really lovely. I mean, almost every property has a sea view. It's just wonderful. When it comes to the price of the properties over there, they're typically less than they are on the mainland. The only concern I have is that I read an article just recently saying about the property prices in Portugal, and they said that the prices in Madeira have decreased by 14%.
Oh,
So what does
okay.
that mean? I don't know long term. What it does mean to me is there's an opportunity there. And previously the prices were already lower. Now they're even lower. How much lower they go, I don't know. But I do know there's a lot of motivated sellers there, and it's really an island paradise. I love it.
I must say I love it too. I think it's a really, really beautiful part of the world. I think I maybe prefer the Azores, but Madeira is also really, really beautiful, and it's somewhere that is that little bit less untouched at the moment. I can see it really becoming popular, and like you say, there's all these additional selling points to it, like the tax regimes and things like that.
Yeah,
And so it's great to know you cover there.
yeah, we do, absolutely. And just to go back to Azores and Madeira, what I've learned is that Azores is more beautiful. It's more naturally beautiful. As a diver, for example, myself, I know that the whales go through that area, and you can see the most magnificent creatures just going through the area. Whereas Madeira has a bigger population, So some people get concerned about the island life and how it may
Yeah.
drive them insane, not meeting many people. And I kind of see Azores as maybe that, unless you're attuned to that kind of lifestyle, which I am. And then Madeira has a much larger population. So if you're looking for more things to do or just more people to spend time with, that may be the better choice for you.
Okay, that's definitely good advice, Scott. Yes, I've been to one of the islands that has, I think it had about 400 people on it at the smallest one, and that would have definitely been very close knit. I grew up in a small town myself, and I don't know. I think that might be a bit too much for me, but
Exactly.
yeah,
That's
maybe
right.
maybe Madeira if you're trying to
Good place to
avoid
visit.
that. Yeah, exactly. There are places to live and places to visit.
Exactly.
Um, I've had quite a few questions about buying new builds. I guess there's more development going on in Portugal, and also people are thinking about avoiding some of the problems that go with, buying an older property. We discussed sort of insulation and things like that. But you run into other problems then with new builds in that you sometimes have to pay the money up front and you don't know anything about the company that's building it. Can you give any sort of advice on buying a new build property in Portugal?
Yeah, sure. So new builds are great in the fact that you move into a property that is yours. No one's lived there before. Oftentimes, the builders can take recommendations of what materials they want, what materials you want to have in the property, what appliances you want, etc. It's really yours, and there's something special about that. There's also big discounts when it comes to buying a new build because of the fact that you're buying it before it's done, and there is an element of risk involved in that, and therefore the builders see that, and they're willing to give you a bigger discount when it comes to buying the property than they would otherwise once it's done. That's why most times in properties you look at the price of them, and if a property's been on the market for too long, it goes down in price, down in price till they find a buyer. Whereas new builds go the other direction. They start off at this price, and every area that they develop goes a little bit higher and a little bit higher until completion, where it's the full value. So if you're able to get in earlier on in the stages, you can get a really good value on the property. In fact, what people do is they buy at that stage and then they sell once it's done, and it's
Okay.
significant earnings to be made that way. Of course, there's problems with that. Sometimes builders are not reputable and they'll take your money and run. Thankfully, it doesn't happen often. In fact, I'm not sure of anybody who's done that, but it does happen, I'm sure. And so what you have to do is you have to do the same thing with buying a regular property as with a new build. You have to do your due diligence, and that is researching the builder. How many other buildings have they constructed? Are there any lawsuits for that builder already? Et cetera, et cetera, how long they've been in business for. This is the first property they've done in Portugal. And once you do all that and understand at what stage of development they're in, you really have to reach your comfort level. And once you do that, with regards to the lawyers assisting with the due diligence, surveyors, et cetera, it's really up to the individual to decide whether or not they're willing to accept the risk. I think it's a great opportunity to get a property at a lower rate, as long as you're willing to wait a year or two
Mhm.
for its completion.
Okay, that is really useful. And do new builds typically come with any kind of warranty in case there's sort of teething issues or anything like that?
Yeah, they almost always do, and that's one of the things for the CPCV we talked about before to put in
Okay.
there. So, for example, like a 5 or 10 year warranty on the walls and all the
Yeah.
electrics, etc. You can also get warranties on the appliances, and each, of course, manufacturer has a different warranty depending on what you're buying. So, yeah, there's certainly protection.
Certainly a lot of protection there. And do any of these kind of protections exist to buying like let's say I buy a property in Portugal, the seller completes everything that I said on the CPCV and then problems start afterwards. Is there any warranty there?
Not so much, not unless it's mentioned in the CPCV. Everything that's why the CPC is so important. You can put things in there. It says, if the appliances break within 6 months, maybe there is some way to compensate for that. But typically, if it's not in the CPCV, you're on your own.
Okay. And Scott, do you cover anything sort of like foreclosures or bank repossessed properties, anything along those lines as well?
Yeah. So on buyproperty.com, we have this interesting technology. I mentioned a few other things where we compare properties with other properties and how much they can rent it out for, et cetera, price history as they go along. But we also have this other feature, which again exists on no other portal, that is the stress level and the distress level of each property.
Okay.
So the distress level, for example, is if a property is distressed, we consider it 100% distressed if it's owned by the banks. So if a bank is trying to sell that property, it's already been repossessed from the owners. You can search on the site for looking for only distressed properties. But we also took it one step further, and we said that we want to add the stress level of a property. And what that means is we have 27 different indicators or data points that we look at to determine the stress level or the motivation level of the seller. And that comes in terms of things like, how long it's been on the market for, how many price drops there have been, how big the price drops have been, how many other properties in that area have dropped down in price, how many properties have sold in that area, what kind of property it is it an apartment or a house, and so on and so forth. And from that, we're able to detect and determine the stress level of each property. So when you go on the site, you can see, again, how motivated the seller is based on that percentage point.
Okay, that is very, very useful to know. And some of the questions in here have sort of been like, how does buy property differ to other property portals that people might be familiar with? So I think it sounds like it's this level of information that you're able to provide rather than just sort of pictures, price, description.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't always like to bash the competition, but if you look at ID Lease, their website, I mean, it looks like it was built in the 1980s. It's really terrible. It's the oldest one, so therefore it has a lot of properties on there. It's not, the properties they have on there is great and so on, but they've really not innovated at all in the last 30, 40 years. Nobody really has. And so that's why we decided to come on board. We saw this as an area that we could provide additional information to people, and that's what we've done.
Okay, very, very helpful. Scott, I do have one interesting question here for you, just slightly off topic. Someone said they've seen a listing where it says that the family retains usage to property.
Yeah,
This sounds like an unusual one. Is this sort of the kind of unusual thing that you might come across in Portugal?
it is, yeah, and it's not as uncommon as people think. I mean,
Okay.
if you look at the most distressed properties and stress properties on our site, you rank them and sort them by the stress level. A lot of the ones that are like 100% stressed have been on the market for a long time. They had a few price drops, etc. Often they're these kind of properties, and I'll give you a few examples. One of them is this gentleman who may be 80 years old, and he has his property in this case in Cascais. And he doesn't have enough money to survive, right? So he wants to sell his property, but maintain the rights to live in that property until he passes with rent free. And so that's a risk, right? And it's really an awkward position that brings the buyer in, because you have to then determine, how healthy is this person? Is he going to live for 10, 20 years, or he's going to knock off in 6 months? It really makes me uncomfortable to think about, but that's what this gentleman is trying to do. And so, for example, the property may be worth, say, 650,000, and he's selling it for 350,000. So if you can, take that risk and you're comfortable with that risk, then maybe you'll get a really good deal on a property, or maybe he'll live us all and you're in trouble. So that's one example. Another one, they came up with this. It always makes you uncomfortable in these situations, because this gentleman had received ownership of the house from his mother, and his mother was living in the back annex in the property. And the deal was that people who bought the property could live in the main house, but the mother would always have to live in the back house, and they always maintain rights for that. But they said you couldn't meet the mother, you couldn't look at the property or anything like this.
Okay.
It's like, okay, that's something I couldn't suggest moving forward on that, because anything can go in the back and you don't know, and it's not worth the risk. So again, it's a matter of evaluating each decision. It's not something that I'd recommend doing on a regular basis, but there are some options. So people that maybe have some extra money, they're okay with waiting 10, 20 years to receive a return on that.
Okay, it sounds like yeah, these are things to think about. We talked about the things like pools not being fully legal and things like that. They're all things that people can weigh up on and discuss with you, but generally speaking, it sounds like it's an easier life for you if you avoid the more complicated ones.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, again, it all comes down to the comfort level of the buyer, but and measuring the risk. I don't think those ones are worth the risk, in my opinion.
Okay. And what about debts to property? Can properties accumulate debts? And if so, is that something that you can sort of analyze before someone purchases?
So, I mean, obviously there's debts such as mortgages, and those mortgages are, the mortgage essentially ends when the property is sold, so that's not transferred on. There are other debts that are potentially incumbent upon the buyer. But those are what's put into the CPCV and have the lawyers do the due diligence on the property to be able to identify. And if there is a surprise at any point in time, we have the CPCV document that says they're responsible for all the previous debts, and we can go back to them for that.
Okay. One thing I've noticed, Scott, is that there's properties in Portugal there's quite a range of properties available. Like the ones in the Algarve are quite different to the ones in the north of Portugal. Have you noticed this?
Oh yeah, I mean, so what? Yes, I love Porto in the north. I think it's one of the most beautiful cities. But coming from Vancouver Island in Canada, where it rains a lot, my whole point is to get away from the rain. And I think Porto is great, except for the weather, because it rains all the time as well. It's really good for grapes, because some of the best
Okay.
wines come from up there. But I'm not a grape, so I choose warmer weather. That's why I'm in the Algarve. But the good thing about that is that the property prices are also relative. I mean, a lot of people want to live in the Algarve, Lisbon, and Cascais. And further north you go, there are fewer buyers and fewer people interested in purchasing up there. So the property prices decrease significantly. So, some people don't like the sunshine in the Algarve, so that might be more appropriate for them. And you can get a lot more for your money up north than you can down in the south.
Okay, fantastic. Um, Now, in terms of you're giving out a lot of information here, Scott. In if someone wanted to learn more about this, perhaps just in the research phase, how would they go about that?
Well, it's a couple of ways. First of all, they can contact me through the site, as I mentioned.
Okay.
I also sent you a link. So as of yesterday, I'm quite proud to announce that I have a new book,
Okay.
and it just came out. Came out. You can buy it on Amazon if you want. It's the savvy way to buy property in Portugal. But what I'm offering to everybody here is that they can download a PDF version of it for free. I've sent
Okay.
you the link. Maybe you can see it. I
Fantastic.
know
Yes.
nobody else can. If you can put that link in so everybody else can see it, they can read about a lot of what I'm saying and a lot more there. It's
Okay.
free, just to pass on the information. I hope it helps people. There you go. Good. If anybody has a problem with that PDF, I know sometimes people have an issue with the devices they're on. They can, again, feel free to write me through the property portal, and I'll send a different version in for a Kindle or whatever device they need it for.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that is very generous of you to give that away for free. I think everybody will be very happy to have to come on today, and I've gotten that. There's a lot of thank yous coming through in the
I see
chat.
that. Thank you. Thank you.
And it's obviously very exciting to have a published author on the webinar for the first time. Um, so let's see, we've discussed quite a few of the questions that have come up in these before the chat. So I'm just going to go through some of the ones that are coming through. Scott, if you spot anything as well,
Sure.
feel free to jump in. One that I see that jumps out there is sort of people use websites like Zillow in the US for themselves just to work out how much their own property is worth. If you have a property in Portugal, how do you work out how much it's worth? And is that something Buy Property can help with?
Yeah. So there are many different ways to value a property, of course, and every agent will have their own way of doing that. Typically, what it involves is seeing the properties that are on the market now and seeing how your property it compares to the ones that are for sale, and then you put your price point in between the ones that are for sale. We have a little bit extra information other than other agents where we can see the ones that have been sold or delisted, which also usually means sold, and then we can see how much properties have been sold for. And if somebody contacts us for that, we can then give a little bit better representation of how much not only they should list their property for, but how much they'll likely sell it for.
Okay, that is very, very helpful. And let's see what other questions we've got. We've got quite a few coming through here.
Yeah, sorry, I've been
Is
talking
there,
up with questions.
yes, is there an age limitation on mortgages?
Good question. That one I don't know. I'm
Okay.
assuming you have to be an adult, but we have
Yes.
mortgage brokers on our team. If you go to buyproperty.com, and at the top you'll see a mortgage calculator. If you fill in the information there, we'll be able to answer those questions. I'll be able to put you on to one of our mortgage brokers.
Okay. And just in terms of Portugal as
Oh, sorry. Actually, go back to that question for a second. I'm sorry. There is a limit when it comes to how long you can get a mortgage for. I believe it's changed now to be 70 years old. So say, for example, you're 40 years old, you can get a mortgage for 30 years, 50, 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. It varies per bank. So
okay.
it depends on, it's either 70 or 75. Typically is in that range.
And just on your general opinion on moving to Portugal, I know you're quite strong on Madeira now, but with sort of NHR generally not being an option anymore, it's been modified down, and I think a lot of the people who are looking at this will be thinking as retirees. Do you still see Portugal as an attractive place to move, both let's do lifestyle and sort of investment?
Sure. Let's take a step back to NHR just for a second, because the government just last week has announced that there's going to be changes to the NHR. And you mentioned most people here are probably listening, are pensioners and retirees, in which case the new potential NHR that they're going to be putting forth over the next few weeks won't be applicable. But they are talking about giving more tax incentives to things like digital nomads and people that are either working here as an employee or starting their own business. So that's a really big advantage. When it comes to pensioners, they have double taxation treaties, usually with different countries. So you won't be paying any extra by moving over here, as long as it's from not from a blacklisted country, mind you. So there's not really any disadvantages in that sense. For me, I mean, I'm not retired yet. I wish I was, but I'm not. So I believe that, I mean, again, I could choose anywhere in the world to live. I'm in a really unique situation here. And I chose here, because of the fact that the quality of life is just better. You don't have to worry about as much crime. The politics aren't an issue. It is just a really pleasant way to be. And in fact, for a lot of people, it takes almost like a few months to adjust to. And to give an example, so I came from Brazil, which was a very dangerous place, but I came over here, and I remember walking with my wife and daughter through this area trying to find the kids' park, as an example. And on this hill, this little kid came down, and he was wearing a hoodie, black hoodie, on a BMX bike, and he sees us very clearly. And I'm watching him, and he takes a very direct turn towards us. It dust, I'm going, okay, great. Everyone says it's safe here, but in here I'm about to get robbed within a few days of arriving. And he pulls up to us, and in the nicest Portuguese English accent, he says, "Excuse me, sir, you look lost. Can I help you find something?" And I said, we're looking for this park. And so I was just down there to the right and said, "Thank you very much." And I walked off. And at that moment in time, I thought to myself, I really have to recalibrate my thinking, because it's different here. It's just, it's the way of life is so different that it takes an adjustment period just to get into it. Now, don't get me wrong, there's other adjustment period adjustments you have to make as well. For example, the bureaucracy of the government and having to be patient, with everything. So it's not
Mhm.
all pros, there's some cons. But overall, it's lovely. I say I love Madeira and Azores and all that, and I do. But I chose the Portugal out of every other country I could have gone to, and it's all amazing. It's just different levels of amazing. And for me, it's all about choosing the lifestyle that you have. Let me just see if I can find one thing here. Here we go. So if you don't mind passing on this other article, it comes up. There we
Absolutely.
go. So there. What I do is, a lot of people decide to choose uh, where they want to live without really knowing about each area. And I try to tell people to choose a lifestyle they want before they choose, and then choose an area that suits the lifestyle. And that article I just sent over there talks a little bit about that. And because really every area throughout Portugal is different. I mean, if you want to live, if you like surfing, you can, Nazaré is amazing, right? Everyone's heard of Nazaré. Or El Jazur and the Algarve. If you want to have, a comfortable life, with the Portuguese people, and understand that you maybe want to go interior and understand the more typical lifestyle. If you want a more party place, maybe Albufeira. If you want a more relaxed, comfortable lifestyle, and then maybe Tavira. You want a city life, then Lisbon, Cascais. And it really every area is so different that it's really important for people to understand what they want out of their life here in Portugal before they choose which area they want to move into.
Yeah, absolutely. There really is a little bit of something for everyone here for what is quite a small country geographically. It's very very diverse, and I think that's great advice. And to your point about sort of safety in that in Portugal, I think it really does take an adjustment because some people moving from different parts of the world, including I've noticed the US, and that just have a different concept of what safety means that compared to Portugal, and don't sort of imagine that you could be walking alone at night in most parts of Portugal. There are exceptions, of course, and feel quite safe. Whereas if you were in somewhere else, you would be looking over your shoulder or thinking I better get walking pretty fast. And you don't have that feeling as much in Portugal for sure. So it is an adjustment. Obviously, you have to take precautions and everything, but generally speaking, a very safe place.
Exactly. As you said, you got to take precautions always, just because it always is,
Yeah,
people that aren't from Portugal come here and if, especially if you're in the tourist areas, people go to, where they have the most opportunity, and
yeah,
tourist destinations where people are getting drunk and falling over themselves. So it's probably pretty ripe for thieves to pickpocket them, etc. But when it comes to like violent crime, guns and such, there's such a small amount of that is even non-existent. It's really the
yeah.
crimes of opportunity that happen here, rather than mass shootings and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So then, and with a 10-year-old little girl, that was really important to me,
Sure.
and yeah, so that's why we're here. One of the reasons
Okay.
why we're here.
Fantastic. Well, Scott, I do notice some people saying that they've already been on Buy Property and they're finding some properties there that weren't listed on Idealista. So I think that's a big selling point for using your service. Let's see if we can find some more questions to answer for people. I don't know if there's anything that you have spotted.
Well,
Do you know
we
anything
mentioned about
about?
the IMT thing before, and as people couldn't see my link, if you could maybe forward that one link I just sent to you, and then that
Yep.
will allow them to click on the top and see the IMT calculator.
Let me do that, and then people can get an idea of different prices because I know some people had asked for prices above 100,000 as well. I just given it
Mhm.
as a simple answer. In terms of mortgage rates, Scott, if do you have a sort of an overview if someone was to take out a mortgage now? I guess it varies depending on things like deposit and that, but what sort of rates are people looking at?
4 to 5% typically right
Okay.
now. It depends whether or not it's the primary residence, whether or not it's for rent, how much deposit they have, how old they are, if it's fixed or variable or mixed. There's lots of different variables.
Okay. And so you mentioned there just sort of buying property for yourself, buying property for rent. Are there major differences in terms of sort of additional taxes or mortgages that people should think about?
Yeah, there is. When you're looking at it as an investment, there's more taxes, and sometimes the mortgage rates are higher as well. Depends how good your mortgage broker is, really. But yeah, there's as an investment, it typically is always higher.
Okay.
Yeah, the IMT calculator shows that. It gives you an option of saying if this is for your residence or a rental unit.
And so someone has asked there if there's a way of seeing how long a property has been on the market. I'm guessing that's like a buy property secret sauce of how it works that out.
That's right. So what I recommend to everybody listening is if you come to the site, you'll be able to see a small fraction of the properties that are available and all the data we have about those. But due to legal reasons, we actually had some complications with other agencies because they don't like us releasing all this information to the buyers. So they don't like the fact that we can say that this property's been on the market for a year and a half and 3 price drops, etc. So we had to close that by putting up a registration wall. It's a free registration, and if you log in and you register, it'll give you access to not only all the different properties throughout the country, but also all the additional information that helps you make a smarter buying decision. And
Okay,
one of
fantastic.
those is how long it's been on the market for.
Okay. And like you said, the useful thing from that is that properties have been on the market longer, potentially easier to put in an offer.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, let's see what other questions we have, Scott.
So one
Um,
person saying here about can I apply for the residence visa with only a 6 month rental? No, it has to be a 1 year rental, and it has to be submitted to finances in order to be legal. So you have to either buy a property or rent a property for at least a year.
Okay.
Just
Fantastic.
one thing on that. What is possible is sometimes is to have an out clause. After 6 months, if you pay, you lose your deposit or whatever, you can get out of it. That's something we can help people as well with. Just so you know, let me maybe send you another link here. As I mentioned, if anybody's on Facebook, you can go to a Moving to Portugal group that we have. It has 350,000 members approximately.
So
And what
just
we
a
do,
small one then.
and so what we do is we help people in a lot of different ways. One of which is obviously with property. But we found out through this process that a lot of people need extra help. So for example, they need a lawyer for their real estate transaction, or they're looking for visas, etc. So what we try to do is we created this system, a service called visas.pt, where again, what we do is we link the clients with independent lawyers at an affordable rate so they can get their visas sorted out, NIF numbers, bank accounts, etc. So that's one of the things that when a person asked about the rental agreement, we can help them understand all the requirements when it comes to D7 visa, D8, and all the other ones.
Okay, that's fantastic. And I know from looking at other services, Scott, that your visas.pt is very affordable for people.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. Well, we like to think so, because what we're trying to do is we directly link them to the immigration lawyers rather than work as an agency where we take a big percentage of the profit. So it works out quite well because these people have been doing immigration law for many, many years, and it made sense.
A lot of people are asking for the Facebook page. Perhaps, Scott, I will send out an email after this
Sure.
and send it to everyone. There's quite a few links to share. I think the property sort of legal analysis service that you mentioned, where you'll just sort of help people through that, that sounded really, really helpful. So I know people are very interested in that too. I'll include that in the email.
Okay.
Going, let's see what other questions we have. There's a sort of maybe a general question about when you should buy in Portugal. Like, should you live here and rent for a bit first? Should you buy after a year? Do you have any sort of personal insights on that, Scott?
Yeah, well, my personal insight is probably not right for everybody because I'm a little bit more
Okay.
adventurous than most. Again, before we came here, we had traveled all around the world, and we realized we needed a stable place to raise our daughter. And the way we did it was where we were living in Brazil. One of our neighbors was from Porto, and they turned out to be really great friends with us. And we ended up doing a lot of research on Portugal and moving over here before we'd ever even visited, which is not always recommended. It worked out well for us, but I'm not saying it'll work out for everybody. And we started off in Porto and stopped a few different days in every little place along the coastline to find out where we wanted to be. And Vila Moura in the Algarve was right for us because I'm very much an island boy and I love boats, and that's the best marina in the world there. But what a lot of people do is if they're far away, for example, right now we're doing a transaction for somebody who's living in Japan and they're buying a property over here, sight unseen, etc., because it's very expensive to come here and view, especially this time of year. But what I suggest to people is if you can, come over for a scouting trip. Come over for 2 weeks at least, maybe hopefully longer, and visit the different areas, understand the different areas, and understand the pros and cons of each area. Identify what you're looking for, and do that first. And then while you're here, maybe look at properties and see what's available, and do some viewings. It's really up to the individual. Again, it comes back down to comfort level and risk level that they're very comfortable with. You should probably, unlike me, you should probably visit the place you moved to before you move there.
Well, it worked out for you. So,
Yeah, it certainly
and
did. I mean, we love it here. We're so happy that we moved here. The Portuguese people are amazing. They're really friendly, really helpful. The lifestyle here is great. I mean, it's such a beautiful sunny day here, and I talk to my family back home or my friends in the UK. It's not always. I feel bad, sort of laughing at them, thinking how beautiful it is here and how cold it is there. But sometimes I can't help myself.
yeah, absolutely. It is a completely different lifestyle, and I've seen people come and buy sight unseen, and it's worked out perfectly for them. And I've seen other people who've come and they've visited for ages and they've done lots of research and things like that. It probably depends a little bit on the person, but there's nothing to stop someone from doing what you did if that's right for them, or doing the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. It's whatever's right for the person, and each person's different. And we can help with everybody with whatever stage they're at, and we're used to that. So it's really up to the person.
Lots of people saying thank you for the webinar, Scott, saying that they
Ah,
wish you had been around when they were purchasing a few years ago.
well, that's nice of them to say. I wish I was too.
And in terms of your services, Scott, are they available for anybody who buys a property through the site or purchases through the site?
Yeah, I mean, they can buy the property. Our services are available as a buyer's agent service, regardless of whether they buy through the site or not. You
Okay.
know, the criteria really only comes down to whether or not they've contacted the agency first or not. That's the main one. Like I mentioned before, if they contact the agency first, we can't help them because that person's less likely to share commission with us, and
Yeah.
therefore we can still help them, but we have to charge for our services rather than provide them as part of the commission we receive.
Okay, fantastic. Scott, is there anything else that you sort of want to cover with relation to buying property in Portugal?
I mean, I just want to stress the fact that people should really get legal assistance in buying the property and
Yeah.
get proper surveys and do the due diligence on the property before they make a purchase. Because there's so many things that could go wrong. Some people think that because it's safe to buy property back home, they don't need a lawyer to go through this. But I'd highly recommend they do get some assistance, especially someone who understands the whole framework here in Portugal.
I think that's great advice. And yeah, I see it with visas as well. A lot of people think like, well, I could just fill out the form myself, and a lot of people do get their visa applications correct. But I think, you shouldn't just say that Portugal is the same as your own country, especially if you're coming from somewhere where everything is done by the book, and that because Portugal is a very, very different country when it comes to buying properties or anything to do with bureaucracy. And especially if it's your first time moving there, it's always good to have a little helping hand. And it sounds like your buyer's agent service would potentially not cost anyone anything. So why not use that if you're going to buy a property?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the whole thing. To be honest, it's one of the reasons that we set up the service is because when we came here and we were looking to buy our property, we had so many people helping us along the way, and it saved us from making really big mistakes. That now I kind of feel it as a way to give back and return the
Yeah.
favor by helping other people.
Well, thank you so much for that, Scott. That is really, really helpful. Yes, this will be recorded to everybody who's asking. There's been a lot of links shared, a lot of information. So you'll be able to go on YouTube and listen to the recording. I'll send out the link to Scott's different websites, his property, his legal services, and everything else, and obviously his Facebook group. And if you didn't get a copy of his book as well, I'll make sure that's included in there too.
Well, thank you, James. I really appreciate everything that you've done. In talking to you, you asked some really great questions. I hope it's been helpful for everybody listening.
It's yeah, it's been very informative. So I really appreciate you coming on, Scott, and thank you so much to everybody who joined. Okay.
Thanks. Okay, bye.
Thanks. Bye.